Hello, everybody. It's awesome to have you here. Thank you to the event organizers, to Anne-Marie, to Andy in the back, and to Chris. Hold on. Today, I'm going to go as fast as I can through how I got started, where it's going, and why we're headed there. If you want to check out stratacut.com someday, that's where I come from. I program time-space as an animation medium. A Tale of Two Realities, a nod to Dickens. Ego motion meets the spatial web. How many hands in here know what ego motion is? All right, I will get to the blockchain DLT part of it. Good. You meet the AR planet. That's sort of the reason that we have youAR as a company name. The chief value of what we're creating is persistence. Persistence is going to increasingly be the transformative utility technology of the AR net. A lot of people talk about the AR cloud. It's a really useful term. It talks about the creating of machines understanding the spatial dimension of everything that is around them. But the AR net is just as important, and it will be transformative to the way we live and experience. Its destiny is that it needs a spatial web. I'll talk about that. There will be an enormous amount of spatial data created. This is a fire hose of data that we all kind of abstractly look at in the distance. It's coming like a freight train, but we have no answer as to how to control that data in a way that doesn't take advantage of our behaviors. And that's where it meets the DLT. I like distributed ledger technology better than the word blockchain. I like the event system. Blockchains are very useful, but I'm mostly interested in the event system. How that gets exchanged or monetized is a different question. And then how two realities, this is getting into the mental state. When you have a virtual world connected, locked, and inevitably contoured to every part of space persistently with reality meeting the virtual world, you really are creating a new human language. This is a transformative, disruptive moment. I know that it seems fairly distant to us because we're sitting here in this room, but in 10 years, this will be the way commerce and society actually works, or at least an enormous new part of it, and I want to go into some of that. So quickly, ego motion. Ego motion is something everybody does. You're all doing it exactly now. Every creature on Earth, every object moves. Position, pose, translation. They move against a field, if you want to call it, XYZ space. Your airplane, roll, pitch, yaw, translates into that space. These terms may not be identical, but for most purposes, they almost are identical. When old school ego motion is us using our bio-IMUs and our biological gyroscopes, we've done great strides for making this device trackable. So the ego motion of the device is generally what people are referring to, but it's important to remember that we all do this in reality all the time. I wanted to talk about persistence. A lot of people don't even think about it, but if your AR content can stay in the same spot and never leave, that is a transformative moment. Many companies are finally working on this. We've been at it for 4.5 years in our research and development. We're turning into product. It's difficult, but it's an ambitious thing worth trying. I wanted to think of a simple way of an analogy. When you are in a spatial information desert, you sort of like can see a palm tree and it disappears because there's nothing to ground it and there's nothing to actually hold on to. You tend to power up an isolated mirage, currently in AR. It appears right above this lonely tree, which is your single device. You play your game, you power down, poof, it's gone. The big deal about the AR cloud is it's really a tracking oasis, again, to go with the analogy. If you can ground each time your device, you've actually created a really powerful tool. This is meeting the AR planet. This is where you meet it, because persistently, a new mirage can actually be locked to that position. The tree, if you want to call that as an analogy, core kit or HMDs, and also the render engines that run it, and then the AR cloud or anchor, which is actually telling you exactly where you are precisely in space. Generally, currently, I feel persistence is a one-off. It's a one-app, one-off currently. When most people talk about it, they think, oh, I've got persistence, but it doesn't tend to be coherently transformative amongst many different experiences at all yet. And that's what we're trying to accomplish. This is a really simple way to express what we're working on. 6D AR net, based off of the spatial web, and there's lots of other people in the room who are working on that. What you really want are multiple apps at once. Ultimately, for us to exchange our content with each other in a really fluid and dynamic way, you don't want to have just one app hanging out there. I don't know where I am. You need to be discoverable, exchangeable, tradable. You need the CV to join across devices. So I'm going to suggest convergent CV a little later. And you need the many AR clouds underneath to sort of multi-mesh, to understand their individual relationships, that puddle of information. You also need far and distant clouds to triangulate. A lot of people don't think about the gaps. There's going to be a patchwork of different information that we all have. If you're going to understand, like across Vancouver, where a bit of AR is, and I want to hold up my phone or my HMD and see it, then my cloud, which is the persistent space I'm in here, needs to triangulate properly to whatever's across there, so you really have an AR net finally starting to work. You need to think further than just what I've described, because content and logic must dynamically change in real time. It's just like the internet, only in 6D. This is difficult to sandbox and secure, but it is like the internet in 6D. Apple currently doesn't support this very well. Android supports it much better. Eventually they may migrate to a more open system. They tend to close it off because it is difficult to sandbox and secure, but hey, we don't close off the internet. It has its problems, but we always try to work around them and deal with it. Here is a really crude way of looking at a spatial stack. So the GeoCanvas, and I'm going to say that because AR gets painted onto the world, you need a canvas, a transparent, invisible layer to paint your AR onto, is actually understanding where each device is and its position and pose tracking. I did want to mention, position and pose is the 3 dimensions to the XYZ, which together make this 6D. So don't be afraid of that term. There is time. You could call it 7D, but I'm not going to go there. It's all too many numbers. And each piece of content is locked to each particular better than GPS spot in 6 degrees of freedom, and better than GPS is really important. Currently, you can have a piece of content, it floats, that's pretty doable. Getting it to actually lock down to 4 inches or 2 centimeters, these are the goals of everybody working as hard as they can. But it's very important in our vision of it that each of these can understand each other. Of course, they can be permissioned off and you can go private, but it's important that the ability for these pieces to not be siloed. Siloing is natural. Different players just want to sort of make their thing, but this talk will be all about convergence, unification, and accommodation. All native CV solutions should or must share common maps to converge for unified computer vision. This is kind of important. It may not seem like an issue yet, but to us, there's nothing more important. We currently, as R&D, going into product, have Android working with a common map on iOS, and we have Magic Leap seeing that, and we have HoloLens seeing that. So that's exciting. I just want to say, temper your enthusiasm. It's always more difficult to get that out as a product, but it absolutely works, which means other people can do it as well, and it means it's coming. It's going to be done by other people. In fact, I think the convergent CV thing will be done by many people in a couple of years because it's such an obvious necessity. The key is to make it lightweight enough, because you don't want to add yet another process to your already full stack on your phone. You want to actually, that's the key issue. And we have a certain solution. There'll be other people with others. Why can't we get along? The answer is yes, we can. And persistence is a really big deal for HMDs. Right now, when I hold up my phone, it's not so much, because your hand gets tired maybe after 5 minutes. You've had your experience to put it away. But imagine when these glasses are seeing everything constantly, then persistence is like a 3-hour experience each day, which is a massive economic and transformative event. Currently, we have 2,000 phones at a time. This is a simulated load test. The bandwidth is a bigger issue than the phones sharing, and specific app resource balancing, of course, completely changes everything all the time. So I wouldn't say that's a boast, but I wanted to ask anybody who wants to send Bitcoin to 200,000, we could actually buy that many phones and try it out. Multi-application. Any developer can compete for the common space. This is a really big deal for the ARNet. You need a democracy and a market for 6D ideas, games, apps, and utilities on the shared space of the common map. This is just like the internet. Why would we want to be siloed into Disney and Warner's and McDonald's and Starbucks? It's really tedious. Currently, you have to always load up an app. People have talked about a universal spatial browser. There will probably be many of them based off of certain protocols. I have no idea how that will work out. But the multi-application can be thought of as layers. Channels are layers, other people use those terms. I wanted to say that this is not multi-app. This to me is like location-based services where you throw these kinds of existing 2D virtual experiences onto a map and call it persistent something. And it's really just grafting a 2D or a virtual idea onto. There'll be a place for this, but it isn't really what I'm speaking about. This is really what I'm trying to describe, multi-app, where each of these are layers and channels on the common map, and you have, well, 2,000 devices that converge with CD content, and it's all located to the geocampus. And this is always finding exactly where you are. Of course, you use GPS to some degree, but it's really about the actual on-location, real precision is really the key, because otherwise it's not really that useful. You have to have very localized maps that work well on the geocampus.
Does that include like topographical data? You know, not just like, because Google Maps or whatever is like flat.
Yes, it should. Anything is possible. I mean, the utility functions are just astronomical. GIS would be what I would think of as a use case, and I could speak to that later. There's an enormous. It's coming, and it will be the way 3D delivered GIS space will be normal in a couple of years. Think about multi-app. You have a certain amount of space on your phone or your device. You can divide that in certain ways and actually have concurrent, I would call it applets, happening at the same time, up to the capacity of your phone. We have this working, or you can have contextual sequential apps that are layer switching, meaning there's sort of all 5 of them are full, but you've ghosted one or paused it until you want to look at the next one. And that's a great H&D use case because I'm the surgeon, I'm in my office, and I'm looking at the blood pressure app, and I'm looking up here, and those can all be using the full capacity of the CPU GPUs, but not being able to app switch is oddly something that I don't see yet happening in HMDs. I know that Windows can have its own pieces and magically has an answer, but I feel there's a much deeper level of sophistication that needs to happen. So I'm going to sum this up as to where we have come from for dynamic persistence, and then move on to meeting the spatial web. The minimum viable that we're trying to SDK right now is a global geocanvas, delivers real-time spatial AR sync, massive multi-user, authoring, hosting, sharing tools, dynamic persistent AR content and logic, placed on a highly accurate common map, using unified computer vision. And again, that can come in many ways. We have our flavor, and it will be copied, and joins today's handsets to the long-term adoption of HMDs. That's it in a nutshell. That's what our company is trying to do. And there's a lot other, this is like the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of other things on this list. I'm not going to talk about them because they're roadmap and developmental. This is the problem space that we attacked. This is sort of lays out everything that is issues that we wanted to make, to solve. The ARNet, being what you call cyberspace or virtual, has to meet the AR cloud. Everybody's sort of focused on this side. We think they go together and you have to focus on that side as well. I charmingly call it meat space because I've read too many sci-fi novels, but you would call that the digital or virtual side. These are sort of the placement issues on the AR cloud, the multi-users, and this is the content layers. And there's an abstraction link that needs to go to future WebAssembly on the exit, and there's future AI and semantic CV coming. This is the full stack. Currently, we're delivering that to alphas. This seems to be what everyone wants, so we may do a limited version of just the CD plus the GeoCanvas. but that we can only split so many resources, but that may be good. This is an operating environment. Many people would say, oh, it's an OS, it's an operating system. And the truth is no, that has too much baggage on hardware, and so I didn't want to come up with that. But getting the actual dynamic logic to attach to these things, going to the GeoCanvas, having massive devices, going to the common map, eventually, I wouldn't say we're there, but getting to multi-apps and layers and channels is where to go. The story of persistence grows exponentially larger in time. And our current issue is how do we make the cell phone relevant to persistence? There's a lot of use cases for it, but it tends to be a 10-minute use case. And by 2030, everybody will say, hey, why isn't my content hanging around for hours like it's supposed to? Now, persistence meets the spatial web. Finally, we're here. Why do we need a geoid? And a geoid basically is a deformed Earth that actually matches the Earth. It's not an abstract oval. It's actually like contoured. XYZ spatial index. We definitely need one because a spatial web URL space triggers multi-domain events that join into the larger whole. There's all these other economic and other issues. You could list them, IoT, and on and on. This might be two old ways to look at what would a XYZ URL address look like. And this is sort of a GIS version of it, sort of orthographic view. I'm not saying this is what you're doing, but these are the first concepts that come to mind. And then you would probably voxel or octree the different slashes of the URLs going down. I feel when I define it, the spatial web is accurate point assignments in 6DOF planet space plus time. You could call it 3DOF because that's actually just the sort of XYZ plus time, that's 4 dimensions, 7 dimensions, whatever you want to say. So accurate point assignments in 6DOF plus time gives you a sort of breadcrumb trail information inside a cubic event space of the spatial DNS. I think of this sort of as a tensor matrix, like any cubic space that is defined by the GeoCanvas can do time flow, although I'm not an engineer, I'm an artist, so I want to apologize in advance if I've got that wrong. But that's how I think of it. This cubic area then can be populated by any kind of coincidental event, and a list of those kinds of events would be AR, MR objects, proof of location, artificial intelligence, machine learning, which is a huge use case, robotics, smart objects, IoT, smart contracts, behaviors, geofence triggers, sensor event tracking, all coincident, they're all corresponding to each other. All information needs to be talking to all other information, and that's, if anything you take away from it, that's really what the deck is about. I'm an artist, so when I look at this is how I think the spatial event DNS would look if I could just strip away reality and take away the objects. It'd be like, wow, this is just points happening all over in the world. In a sense, we'll all be connected and changing each other's spaces as we are interconnected in the web. I want to really go off one moment here, indulge me, that a planet-scale compute space means dance can be a form of programming. I think of this as the Boolean functions, this is the change states, and this is the memory of dance. If I am moving in spatial terms, then I could be triggering all kinds of events based on my motion. Spatial data meets the DLT. So quickly, we were attracted to blockchain temporarily. There's some downsides to it, it's very volatile. We wanted to figure out a way to create a big tent where all data is exchanged with all other data, and no lack of ambition there. And we have an abridged white paper finally to let go. This isn't actually an ICO or a actual release. We sort of backed off because we saw other people in the space doing interesting things, and we are running an AR platform company, and it's hard to do two crazy things at once. So for resources alone, but there's 6 highlights from this paper if you want to download it. The near field is the scan area to emphasize. That's where humans are. The visual index, comment capture format, such as Matroska, data privacy. This means crowd is create, revise, append, and burn. And the blockchain needs to figure this out. Burning, in order to get GDPR compliant, I've got a lot of ideas about that, but you need to burn it, figure out ways that it's both useful and decentral, but doesn't stay forever in everything. You need an order book that automatically has people exchange licenses and templates, and a GSDX, which is a global spatial data exchange, because all spatial data is useful to all other data. You just don't want to silo that stuff. You want a big tent. This is sort of what the near field scanning looks like to me, and I've just made it up, but midfield is generally the cars, the drones, and far field are the satellites and planes. But this space is where we all want our AR to happen. This is where we want to actually make it go. So there is a place for humans to stand, to create that for everybody else to share, and that's the most valuable stuff. The human personal spaces are what's most important to reality capture for AR at least. This, to me, is why spatial DNS is so important. Eventually, it allows a visual index. That means if enough companies could finally say, hey, I'm going to use that feature set to initialize, it could be a very lightweight, simple procedure, and then you can load up your own CD method off of that, but everybody would actually cooperate. This is a way you can create a third center of gravity, and that's also one of my passions here. Generalized spatial data, common capture format. Troska is a good choice because it can do a lot of asynchronous capture in multi-channels. So you can it's just a wrapper. It's designed so any CV that such as ours or a dozen other ones could actually ask for a request somebody to capture in this format. What I want on the asynchronous part of it is different from someone else, but at least you would create a sense of commonality potentially, and it doesn't have to be this format, it just needs to be something that's sufficient. This is the most obvious part, privacy and data market. A reference app, order books, template license, sales agreements. It's important that it's easy to use. You need a GSDX market. And I wanted to point out capsule nets as one of the most perfect use cases for a scan market data. Jeffrey Hinton, who's one of the leaders in the field of AI, wants to create a dimensionally understood AI, and it's really important that he has what he calls the linear manifold to go with the data set. The linear manifold, complicated word, just means the XYZ space, so he can understand equivariance, which means he can rotate around objects. The AI can actually learn the difference between a house and a boat. The house is a triangle with a square, and the boat is sort of a triangle with a rectangle, but AI that has a bunch of spatial data can actually be fed into CapNets. There will be other amazing things coming in AI, and I know a few things, but there's not time. I do think that a spatial data market has to understand itself over time, that the scans themselves may be really valuable now to create this thing, but over time, there's going to be an upmarket value chain where scans are water. Basically, everyone's scanning all at once. It's all just, it's easy, but there's so many other aggregation and federated ways in which the spatial data market can evolve into something really strong still. So, the spatial DLT, the world on the chain. I'm going to talk about some of the other people trying to work in this space. I want to acknowledge there's a crypto bear. My question is the lack of general adoption going to catch up with the hype? And my premise is that the spatial web is really the ideal killer utility. Of course, it has to still be built fully, but I can see all the pieces coming together as I speak. I know many of the people working on it. AR, VR, spatial compute, AI, and other overlapping domains. Again, all data is important to all other data, and it cannot be served in an existing conventional way because current methods will all sacrifice massive amounts of your data privacy. There's a giant new value add, not only to making it fluid, but also to keeping your own tunnel of how you're playing with the magic. You really need a DLT to help you with that. One of the things that I noticed is that everybody seems to think that we're here, we have computer vision, we have interoperability. Well, let's just network the apps and go to payment and ID. And really what's missing is that the interoperability isn't there yet. You need a lot of scans to actually make an AR cloud. You need the fluid cloud fabric. I would call that a spatial web, because that's a better name maybe. You need the network AR apps. Those all are really still not happening, and that's, when they do, then I think you have solved a lot of things. These are companies in the space. I would like to highlight High Fidelity is really excellent. Phantasmo has a lot of open source and open ideas, which I think are admirable. I think that in the long term, a spatial attention token, an SAT, is needed. That's a difficult thing to do currently because I believe there's a lot of technology that still has to evolve for that to really be a precise kind of blockchain thing where you actually own your data, you get paid for it, etc. Gagecoin made an attempt at it. To me, it felt fairly VR, and again, they're missing enough technology to make it broadly useful. Some issues that need to be addressed to make this happen is a spatial data exchange. Already, Streamer has a really good fluid model. Cape Immersive, I'm shouting out to Vancouver, is very interested in making sort of a Getty images of spatial data exchange. How do you get fast, cheap DLT event costs? Ray blocks and holochain are very interesting. Hyperledger is interesting for private. Augmate is interesting using IOTA. OpenBazaar is still very interesting because I think you could do a Craigslist of data, and so that's still a really interesting model. These are the other problems, because this is a massive data set. How do you decentralize the data storage? These are some of the players in that field. And how do you decentralize the databases? All four of these giant categories need to be addressed. This is a fifth idea. GoFind is focused on compute and AI modeling for spatial compute only. And I asked him why, and he said, well, that way we can compete with AWS and all these other conventional systems, because if you actually focus on a narrower thing and you make it, tune it to that, you can actually make that a blockchainable thing that doesn't get eaten by AWS, Glacier, or other things. These are some other interesting entities in that field. The earliest A to B idea is location, is like tokenized AR Yelp. This tends to happen in when blockchain meets AR, that's the first idea you have. And one of these called XZX claimed to be the Pokemon Go of crypto, which is a super simple way of saying it, but these are other Infiniverse, Arcana, Bubble. I feel that they're very limited and brittle. They're sort of technically going to stay within their own scope. I don't know how they expand later. That's my question. Maybe they will. I do think that there's a couple of sort of proof of location ideas that are very interesting. Phone kind of is good because of the little graphic of the way in which you're triangulating beacons, radio beacons, plus your Bluetooth LTE phone. So people can actually, it's a 5-mile radius, so you get 3 of these beacons. On an urban situation, that makes some sense. And XYO, that's for Oracle, but notice the XY part of it. And that to me is the limiting factor, because I want vertical. I want XYZ. I want the vertical space. We all do. It's a problem that's going to get solved. And I'm sure that these companies will adapt when it gets there. Also, 5G will be a dilemma for them, and they'll adapt to that too, because why do you need, when you have 5G, I don't know that you need those beacons working. But so I really wanted to call out Versus. They're doing, I would call it cross-domain interoperable spatial web. It's a really needed fundamental. When I want to make an AR net, I want an event space that's already tracking every dot in the world, and I want those events to be transferable amongst billions, millions of people. That's a big deal. It's this really, their concept seems very strong, and more than anything, they understand it broadly. As opposed to all the other AR meets blockchain ideas, they're really emphasizing the unification of all these domains, the IoT, the ID, the security, and data tunneling, if I get to the end, will actually be a big deal. So 2 realities, really on a philosophical level, to me that means the original bio-reality plus the 6D virtual reality coming together for the spatial web, AR cloud, AR net, and you really get a multi-level 6D mind-bending moment for the human race. They work together. You have the plastic reel, you have the invisible scaffold joining them, you have the 6D AR net. The 2 realities, physical and virtual, come to what we call in our company trackables, which is a general term for beacons, clouds, 3D markers, anything you can track to, because this will evolve, it won't just be clouds. And you get ultimately a digital hallucination. I would try to coin the term hallucidation, maybe, but we'll see if anybody likes that. This isn't mine, but somebody called it phygital. But the chasm of mind is a really big question. Really, when the 2 realities attack your basic primitive reptile brain reality, your animal self cannot protect or defend itself against this physicalized imagination. This is a really big deal, and we all have to sort of take heart about what that means to us, what's real when the brain can no longer tell, And I believe that this is why using illusion shapes as a language across time and space is Gutenberg wearing magic leap. It's a very special shared invention we're in the process of making. This spatial net, I believe, must be protected by you, again, you are, but us. 6D positional information has vast power, unlike anything we have ever done in the virtual screen with Cambridge Analytica taking our profiles and making, weaponizing our social data. So it's really important that we consciously develop systems that don't allow it to be a deep net human tracking tool. And this would be a general mistake to let governments, and I would call it pervasive corporations. I love corporations, they're not all bad, but if they get big, they tend to not know how to stop themselves, and they're unconsciously even weaponizing these new behaviors against us. The long view, we started off with anonymity and no records, speech, math, printing, web social, mobile and location, which is only 10 years oldish, and finally the 60 AR net AR cloud, which is really where it's all headed. And I wanted to speak that there are many clouds. Many people call this like some generalized term. It needs to be understood as white corporate clouds, gray federated ones, and dark clouds. There will be people who put AR everywhere, regardless of whether you've profiled them off or told them they can't do it. And underlying all of that is a spatial DNS or STRL. This is a complicated slide, but it actually shows a deeper dive into what that would look like with these three clouds. I'm going to run through this so I can give you a deck if you want it after the show to study it a little bit more. My last thought here is that we have two realities as to my talk, the best of times and the worst of times. You sort of have a state version of it where perhaps China would be a good thing to example, where it's you have the white dominant and you have a big government intrusion into it, very small DLT dark clouds. And then you have the corporations. They have GDPR to sort of soften the blow. Duopolies is the best way to think of it. And again, that puts corps above state, but then the people are still at the bottom. This is what needs to happen. This is the third reality, which is an open reality. Stop invisible 6D data farming, or if you do it, be transparent about it. It's not that I'm not unrealistic about data as a really important tool, but be a part. Your data should give you some revenue as you share it, and it should be a transparent exchange. And freedom of speech in 6D is the next giant issue. It will open up all realities. There can be a spatial data commons for us, by us, and protected. We must do better than gallows humor. I'm so sick of the government reading, but never liking my statuses. And then, again, this is a tale of two realities. This is what's on the surface, seductive, overwhelming. In a sense, it's overkill. I know that there'll be a more controlled version of the AR future than this. But then, if the spatial data is owned by those outside of our ability to control it, this is actually not, this is from Ghost Cell, a beautiful movie. And I just wanted to go back and forth saying, reality 1, reality 2, and they really are joined. They're really happening at the same time. So let us be very careful. It's hard to clearly know. The impact on human development will be big. And what to do, I would suggest the OpenAR Cloud organization. It's here to energize privacy and interoperable spatial tech, help Versus. Whether they succeed or not, at least they're the right idea. They're good people and they're trying their hardest. Help Mozilla. I don't know that they've come around, but at least they're all about your privacy. They have the web version of what they're thinking. Help any other companies that are helping a spatial DNS and spatial URL system become common and have your data protected. That's really the call to action. Many realities await us, not just two. This is where the white paper, the abridged white paper can be found. Again, it's information, it's a gift to the world. If you can get anything out of it, good. And the openarcloud.org. Thank you for your time. Well, thank you. Don't be shy, there's only 10 of us.
I'm the lawyer in the room, which means I probably have the least understanding of what I just looked at.
Okay.
But in terms of the immediate commercial product, what's the in the nearest term? What am I paying for? What am I buying in this world?
Oh, wow. The use cases are vast, but you're right. They have to be narrowed to fit what can be done now. There's a lot of enterprise AR going on the floor, as you can tell. A lot of it is not actually grounded. To be able to have a system that grounds all of that information, so you're not just getting a video view and an overlay and somebody's giving you remote expertise. Remote expertise is giant. I would say Block Rabbit. Think about Block Rabbit as an AR thing. So if I want my lawn mowed or this fence painted, I can draw an AR cube and someone can go do it and immediately get their monetary reward. Wow. Good.
Can I get a tattoo?
In AR?
Yeah.
Great question. We're not dealing with body physical tracking because, as you can tell, we've already bitten off the giant piece in the center. So other people might be able to do that once your body is understood and tracked well enough.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you could scan our body, which you can do now, you can scan your body, maybe use it like using the spatial.
Well, you track, the key there is the technology is really tracking your physical shape in real time. And all we would be doing is delivering it. Somebody else would build that app, deliver it to that space if you wanted it that way. But
yeah, they would inject it into
they would inject it into the system. And that's true of AI and other things. There will be a lot of, Unity has a great tool set. It can be injected into the system. Currently it is built on Unity, but we're extracting as fast as possible because we see it eventually in WebAssembly. When that matures, it's not quite there yet. And just because Unity, it's a single place, it's a great place because it has a giant community, but it also fractionally slows down the performance, and there's some other issues. I could go in depth, I didn't have a lot of time, but there's an entire system being built there that's about, it's 10 years advanced, because we, for example, have AR objects. AR objects are these shareable things. They're the nuggets that make a user-to-user interface work. So I can repurpose, create, reshare everything I've made with you, and you can change it and put it in a new place. This is the point of the AR net, ultimately. And you have to build the engine differently than you would for just a one-off app or a game that is typically what people are doing right now. Yeah.
What about digital graffiti?
Digital graffiti is an awesome idea because you can channel it out. You can choose not to look at it. I think that anything that's, as a human language, it's a medium of expression, and yet it doesn't actually, there's going to be a lot of legal, speaking as a legal mind, a lot of legal issues. People tend to think, hey, property rights, I own this building, you can't put AR on it. That's why the darknet will exist, because they're going to put AR on it. And you really need this middle gray net. Why? Because there's a lot of white net stuff that Google and Apple don't want to deal with. You're going to have a federated group dealing with sort of edge cases everywhere where they say, hey, I'm not sure if that's his data or your data or someone else's data. And so that federated piece is kind of essential as long as the protocols are the same and everybody's functioning on the same system. There'll be private clouds, there'll be all kinds of different technologies. Our point in the AIR Cloud Foundation is to find ways to join them, accommodate, unify, and bring different pieces together technically. We do not assume that anybody's going to copy it or, go our way. What we want is a third wheel of gravity, because if we don't have something like Versus doing spatial DNS, and we don't have an ARNet that's somehow useful to everybody directly, then you're stuck with the first two. And neither of those are really appealing. But until you have convergence and a real sense of integration, then where can you run? You have to run to the place that's going to give you data protection. And there's a massive amount of magic going on, so that I do not want to be Pollyanna about the amount of data that I'm talking about. You can't how do you tunnel it? So I can play in the magic and not be taken advantage of. Lots of minds are on it, and I believe that with enough work, there's also security chips being built where they isolate off the CPU and the memory, and in theory, nobody can break into that. These kinds of things exist. I do think that ring signatures are a possible option when you do want to break something. You should be able, it's a dangerous world, you should be able to break things at times. I just don't want it to be a FISA court alone. I think there should be a community that also says, hey, break that data. So it's an open, transparent system. Because it has to happen. I don't know if that made any sense. Okay. I know I'm talking fairly out there, and a lot of you have different, come with different backgrounds as to what all this is about. But I've tried to step you through the fact that your ego motion and your device's ego motion is exactly essential to the AR net. Everything you move and see becomes, it's not only where you are, but it's also your reality that you're projecting or using or being part of. I think it's more than an avatar in a sense of a very personalized version of yourself. It's actually a second use of communication. And what is that? What are you when you use it that way? These are things I think about. Perhaps we're way ahead of the curve, but the practical questions, they're enormous. I mean, open museums. Like you go to where there's a company in England currently working on a Beatles experience called Drawn Code. They're going to make an open museum for all of Liverpool. This is a great example of why will people hold the phone up? Why do they want persistent content? And so you get to see Paul McCartney or George Martin walking down the street, or you get to see videos that are coming that are actually giving you an enhanced understanding. AR has existed in museums already, but it's never existed as sort of a city-scale museum, right? That's not a user-to-user experience, it's a creator-to-user experience, but that's still the entry point today, not a full-fledged AR net. But after 2 years of this, the entry point will grow. I do think that advanced persistence is a big deal, and you just have to begin to think of it not as a single object, single cloud, single application on top of it. I know Andy's been great to stay that long. If you have any other questions, or you want the deck, just give me your business card, and I will get it to you. And I'm around, so I'd love to talk about it more. Thank you. It's lunchtime.